Picture the headline the way most people first read it. Florida releases thousands of snake-killing creatures into the wild. To a lot of viewers scrolling past that on their phones, it sounded like a bad monster movie, some swamp state throwing biology out the window and hoping for the best. Comment sections filled up with jokes. People pictured mutant mongooses or genetically engineered super snakes slithering into backyards next to the alligators, another Florida man headline waiting to happen. Late-night comedians ran with it for a full week, and honestly, it's easy to see why. This is the same state that has had to fight off giant African land snails, invasive lionfish along its reefs, walking catfish that can survive out of water, and iguanas falling out of trees during cold snaps. Adding unleashed an army of snake-killing creatures to that list sounds like satire, not policy. The reality turned out to be a lot stranger than the joke, and a lot more effective than anyone expected. Florida wasn't unleashing a monster. It was fighting one, and the creatures doing the killing were part of one of the strangest, most oddly brilliant wildlife programs in the country, built out of desperation after more conventional methods kept coming up short. Today we're counting down 15 facts about Florida's war on the Burmese python, the giant invasive snake that quietly took over the Everglades, and the bizarre coalition of hunters, dogs, and even the snake's own kind that Florida sent in to fight back. Stick around for number 1, because the strangest weapon in this whole fight wasn't a person or a dog. It was the pythons themselves, and the twist behind that fact is stranger than anything the comment section ever guessed. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel keep making videos like this one. Let's start with number 15, the joke that turned out to be true. Number 15. The Everglades didn't get an invasive species by accident. They got one by the truckload, and nobody in charge really noticed until it was too late. Burmese pythons are native to the swamps and grasslands of Southeast Asia, and they only ended up in South Florida because of the exotic pet trade. Baby pythons are small, cheap, and easy to fall in love with, selling for a few dollars at reptile expos throughout the 70s and 80s, back when owning something exotic was as simple as filling out a form. Grown pythons are 18 feet long, thick as a fire hose, and strong enough to take down a deer. Somewhere between those two facts, a lot of owners quietly let their snakes loose in the wetlands instead of dealing with an animal that had outgrown their house, their budget, and their nerve. Add in a direct hit from Hurricane Andrew in 1992, a Category 5 storm that tore apart a reptile breeding facility near Miami and sent hundreds of captive pythons pouring into the swamp overnight, and Florida had accidentally built a 5-star hotel for an apex predator with absolutely nothing standing in its way. Nobody planned it. Nobody voted for it. It just happened, slowly, one released pet and one broken cage at a time, until the swamp had a permanent new resident nobody could evict. Number 14. The Everglades gave the python everything it needed to become an unstoppable machine, and almost nothing that could stop it. Warm year-round weather that mirrors its native habitat, dense cover to hide in, and an all-you-can-eat buffet of prey that had never evolved any defense against a snake like this. Florida's native mammals grew up around bobcats and alligators, predators that hunt in ways they could learn to watch for. A python that can lie motionless for days, blending perfectly into leaf litter before striking, is a threat their instincts were never built to recognize. Female pythons can lay anywhere from 50 to over 100 eggs in a single clutch, year after year, and with no natural predators anywhere in the region, nearly every one of those babies had a real shot at growing up. Within a few decades, a handful of escaped pets had turned into a self-sustaining population that researchers now estimate in the tens of thousands, spread across more than 7,000 square miles of wetland that is almost impossible for humans to search on foot, let alone patrol on any kind of regular basis. Number 13. By the time officials realized how bad things had gotten, the pythons had already eaten their way through the food chain. University researchers who study the Everglades found that pythons have been documented preying on more than 80 different species, from rabbits and raccoons to bobcats, deer, wading birds, and even full-grown alligators. Necropsies performed on captured snakes have turned up some genuinely strange stomach contents over the years, including whole white-tailed deer, wild hogs, and in at least one widely reported case, an adult alligator that the python had swallowed whole before another predator managed to intervene. Surveys of small and medium mammal populations along the park's main roads showed staggering crashes in numbers, in some cases populations dropping by more than 90% in areas where pythons had become established. It wasn't just one species disappearing. It was the entire mammal community of a national park getting quietly hollowed out by an animal most tourists never even see, because pythons are ambush predators built to disappear into sawgrass and shadow, and by the time researchers had solid data on the collapse, the snakes already had a decades-long head start. Number 12. So when wildlife officials floated the idea of fighting the pythons by releasing more creatures into the swamp, the public reaction was, understandably, disbelief. The state that had already gotten itself into this mess by letting exotic animals loose was now proposing to let more animals loose on purpose. Late-night hosts and online commenters had a field day with it, joking that Florida's solution to an invasive species problem was apparently always going to be releasing something else and hoping for the best. Some assumed officials meant importing a foreign predator, the kind of fix that has backfired spectacularly in other parts of the world, like the infamous cane toad introduction in Australia that was meant to control beetles and instead became its own uncontrollable plague. If Florida had tried that same playbook, the jokes would have been fair. What almost nobody understood at first was that the creatures in question weren't some new import at all. Florida's most effective weapon against the python turned out to be pythons themselves, fitted with tracking devices and set loose to rat out their own kind, which is a far stranger and far smarter idea than anyone in the comment sections gave the state credit for. Number 11. It's called the Scout Snake Program, and it is exactly as strange as it sounds. Wildlife biologists, led by researchers like Ian Bartasek at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, started surgically implanting radio transmitters into male pythons and releasing them right back into the wild. The team currently keeps dozens of these tagged males roaming the study area at any given time, each one broadcasting its location so researchers can follow along without ever having to spot the snake itself in dense brush. During breeding season, which runs roughly from November through April, male pythons will travel long distances hunting for a mate, sometimes crossing miles of swamp in a matter of days, driven by instinct in a way that makes them far more reliable trackers than any human search team wading through waist-deep water. When the male finally tracks down a breeding female, the team moves in, and that female, along with any other male pythons found near her, gets humanely removed from the population. The scout snake, the one who did the finding, gets released again to go find the next one, turning a single tagged animal into a repeat asset for years at a time. It's essentially recruiting the enemy's own biology as an informant, and it works because nothing finds a female python in 1,000 acres of swamp faster than a male python that actually wants to. Number 10. The math behind that program is what turned the jokes into headlines. Since the effort began in 2013, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida reports removing roughly 20 tons of Burmese python from a 200-square-mile study area, including a single record-breaking season that brought in more than 6,000 pounds of snake. To put that in perspective, 20 tons of python is roughly the weight of a fully loaded city bus, all of it pulled out of one relatively small corner of a much larger ecosystem that stretches for thousands of square miles beyond the study zone. Because the program specifically targets breeding-age females, researchers estimate they prevented more than 20,000 python eggs from ever hatching, which means the real impact of the program stretches far beyond the weight of snake actually removed from the swamp. Every one of those 20,000 eggs represents a python that never grew up to eat its own species buffet, never bred a clutch of its own, and never added to a population that was already outpacing every attempt to count it accurately. Researchers are candid about the fact that they'll likely never remove every python from the Everglades, but the goal was never total eradication. It was slowing the snake down enough that the rest of the ecosystem gets a fighting chance to recover. Number 9. The scout snake strategy wasn't the only unconventional idea Florida tried, and it wasn't even the first. Back in 2017, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and the South Florida Water Management District launched the Python Elimination Program, essentially hiring civilians to go out and hunt pythons for pay. Licensed removal agents earn a base rate for their time in the field, plus a bonus for every foot of snake they bring in, with larger bonuses for snakes actively guarding a nest, since a nesting female represents the single biggest threat to the ecosystem in one animal. Applicants have to pass a training course before they are allowed into the field, learning how to safely identify, capture, and euthanize a snake that can weigh over 100 pounds and is more than capable of injuring an untrained handler. It sounds almost too simple to work, paying regular people to walk through the Everglades looking for an animal that is specifically built to be invisible. But the program quietly became one of the most productive tools the state had, in large part because it put far more eyes and boots into the swamp at almost any hour of the day or night than any government agency could ever afford to hire full-time. Within a couple of years, the combined efforts of state-employed and independently licensed hunters had pulled well over 3,000 pythons out of South Florida, a number that kept climbing every single season. Number 8. One of those hunters became something of a local legend almost by accident. Brian Hargrove, a python removal agent working the canals and levees of South Florida, was credited with bringing in the program's 1,000th python within a little over a year of the effort launching, an 11-foot 2-inch male he spotted while driving slowly along a canal at night, scanning the grass with a headlamp. By that point, Hargrove had personally caught and removed more than 100 pythons in just over a year, making him the program's most prolific hunter. Most of the work happens after dark, when pythons are most active and easiest to spot against the pale road surface or the edge of a canal bank, which means the job is less about brute strength and more about patience, driving the same stretch of levee slowly, night after night, scanning the same grass for a shape that almost never announces itself. In interviews, Hargrove described the job honestly, admitting he didn't enjoy killing an animal that, in his words, was simply doing what it was built to do. He kept doing it anyway, because every female pulled off that levee was a clutch of eggs that would never hatch in the Everglades, and because somebody had to be out there doing the unglamorous, repetitive work that never makes it into a headline until a milestone number gets hit. Number 7. If paying human hunters sounds strange, Florida also brought in a partner with a much better nose for the job. Detector dogs, trained specifically to sniff out python scent trails and shed skins that human eyes would walk right past, have been used to help locate snakes hiding in dense brush where visual searches simply don't work. A dog's sense of smell is powerful enough to pick up a scent trail days after a snake has passed through, turning what would be a blind search through acres of sawgrass into something closer to a guided hunt. Early trial programs paired dogs with handlers who would then flag likely locations for human removal teams to follow up on, since pythons are strong enough that most detector dogs are trained to alert rather than engage directly. It's the same basic idea used for drug and explosive detection dogs, just repurposed for tracking down an animal that has spent millions of years evolving specifically to avoid being seen. And early results suggested dog teams could cover ground far faster than a person searching by sight alone. Number 6. Then there's the event that turned python hunting into a genuine public spectacle. Since 2013, Florida has hosted the Florida Python Challenge, an annual, state-sanctioned hunt open to the public, complete with cash prizes for the most snakes caught and the longest snake brought in. Hundreds of participants from all over the country sign up every year, some flying in specifically for the competition, trained in a mandatory online safety and identification course before heading out into designated hunting zones across South Florida armed with little more than a flashlight, a bag, and a lot of patience. Participants range from seasoned outdoorsmen to complete first-timers who just wanted to say they took part, and the top prize money has climbed into the thousands of dollars in recent years as the event's popularity has grown. It's part conservation effort, part reality show, and it turned an obscure ecological crisis into something regular people could actually show up and take part in, which did more for public awareness of the python problem than any research paper ever could, turning a story that used to live exclusively in scientific journals into something people plan a road trip around. Number 5. All that hunting, human and reptile alike, has occasionally turned up snakes so enormous they made international news on their own. In 2022, researchers with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida used a scout snake to track down a female python that, once weighed, nearly broke their scale. She measured about 18 feet long, weighed 215 pounds, and when researchers performed a necropsy, they found 122 eggs inside her, believed to be the largest clutch ever recorded from a Florida python. She had also recently eaten an adult white-tailed deer. One single snake, caught because a released male python led scientists straight to her, had been carrying the genetic potential for well over 100 future pythons, every one of which never got the chance to hatch. Number 4. Here's where the story takes its strangest turn, the twist that even most people following the python saga closely tend to miss. While Florida was busy deploying scout snakes, hunters, and detector dogs against the pythons. The pythons themselves had quietly smuggled in a weapon of their own, one nobody asked for and nobody controls. Researchers discovered that Burmese pythons appear to have introduced an invasive parasite called Railietiella orientalis, sometimes called snake lungworm, into Florida's ecosystem, likely arriving in the lungs of the very first pythons that entered the state decades ago. Burmese pythons evolved alongside this parasite in Southeast Asia over millions of years, giving their bodies time to build up a tolerance for it. So an infected python can often carry the parasite with relatively few symptoms. Florida's native snakes never had that luxury. They never evolved alongside this organism, never built any natural resistance, and when it started showing up in their lungs, their bodies simply had no idea how to fight back. Number 3. The lungworm is genuinely brutal once it takes hold. The adult parasite lives in the lungs of an infected snake, sometimes growing nearly 4 inches long, resembling a pale, segmented worm, and it can trigger severe inflammation, lung lesions, pneumonia, or full-blown sepsis. Graduate students studying the outbreak have described finding infected snakes flipped onto their backs, gasping, with a worm-like parasite visibly protruding from the animal's mouth in its final moments, a genuinely disturbing sight for anyone doing fieldwork in the Everglades. Researchers studying the outbreak have documented the parasite spreading to at least 18 native snake species, from cottonmouths to pygmy rattlesnakes to black races, and its range has expanded well beyond South Florida, showing up as far north as the Panhandle and even into Illinois, likely hitching rides in other snake species that traveled or were transported between regions. Species with especially small lungs, like Florida's tiny pygmy rattlesnakes, seem to struggle the most, since even a single large parasite can overwhelm a lung that small. There is currently no treatment for an infected wild snake, and because snakes already live hidden, secretive lives, scientists suspect the true toll of the disease is being badly underestimated simply because most infected animals die somewhere nobody will ever find them, tucked under a log or buried in leaf litter, out of sight the same way they lived. Number 2.